My name is Arun, and I head the customer onboarding operations for the US and Canada region. And I'm going to try my best to make sure that the informal meeting is as informal as it can get, and at the same time, you get to know some new things um, using Zoho Books the right way. So again, formal welcome to each and every one of you who is here to attend this Finance Zoho user group meetup. And I also have my colleague Dinesh with me. So just in case during the course of presentation, in case if you have like any questions that you want to ask, or if you just want to point out that you have something that you want to discuss about, just feel free to use the chat on this meeting. And if it's a question that could be directly answered by my colleague, he will be replying to you on the chat. But if not, I'll try my best to keep on looking at this chat very frequently to make sure that I'm able to answer all, if not most, of your questions. Now, as Sushmita mentioned, even though this is more about like the basics of Zoho books, I feel that like it's always a good idea to go back to the basics on how Zoho books is to be set up, at least to get started in the right way. So we are going to be looking at how a typical business uses Zoho books or get started to use Zoho books. And we are also going to be going through certain modules inside the Zoho books that would help you to get a better idea of like what Zoho Books is capable of in the first place and how you should be using them. Now we're going to talk about a business called as ZUG Furniture. So this is a furniture business that is going to be trying to move the accounting system completely from using the regular books into an online software, which in this case it's going to be the Zoho Books. Now the scenario that we want to build here is that it deals with both the business to business as well as to business to consumer, the B2B and B2C model. And it has been assumed that so far they have been doing all the accounting stuff just like manually. Just use them in a pen and paper, make a note of like what goes in and what goes out of your accounting stuff, and at the end of the day you tally all those numbers like manually. But we feel that like if this is a business that is quite sounding similar to how you operate, then we felt that the challenges that you may be noticing is that it is very time consuming to keep track of all those different entries that you do on a regular basis. I mean, if it's like in the magnitude of just like very few transactions a day, yeah, it might be manageable, but still I would say it is time consuming. But let's say you process orders in the magnitude of like, let's say 100 orders a day, right? Or like even writing at least like 100 different estimates a day, then it definitely becomes like very unmanageable and time consuming at the same time. Now, when you do those bulk transactions each and every day, it is very likely, I mean, it's a human error, could be possible that you may tend to make mistakes when you're trying to enter something on the books that you might be having. And not to mention, if you're going to be doing everything manually, then you may not be having those insights that could potentially be given by a software. So we are going to be looking at how those reports, the default reports that are available in Zoho Books, could essentially help you out to understand what is happening in your business and what in terms of revenue are you generating, what's the profit that you're making, or if hopefully not the losses that you are incurring. Everything is going to be available to you in a single place. So that's what we're going to be looking at from inside a software point of view. Now, in order to eliminate all these different challenges, let's assume that ZUG Furniture is going to be adopting Zoho Books to manage every single one of the accounting needs online. And so we are going to be trying to go through the journey of ZUG Furniture to see how they set up Zoho Books, what are the features that they're looking at to make sure that they are getting started on the right foot. Now, this is one of the most common, hiccup that I feel is prevalent among most of the new customers who are adopting to Zoho Books is not ensuring that they are getting started in the right way. Some might just forget to, take care of all those accounting that you're coming from a different system. right? And then after venturing into Zoho Books, let's say like you're into Zoho Books for over like 6 or 7 months, then you realize that, hey, why did I even do this? Or why did I not do it in the first place? So those are questions that we tend to see very often with the customers who have been using Zoho Books for quite some time. And so we are going to be talking about what is the correct way to get started. What are those few things that you need to ensure that you are doing it at the very beginning before you start using Zoho Books? But that being said, I mean, like if any of you want to chime in on where did you find it difficult to get started, or if at all there has been a situation where you fell down the line thinking that I may have done the other way if I would have known this thing long ago. I mean, is there something that you want to share with the other peers that you have in this meeting today? Anyone?
I had something for that. My invoices that I was sending were automatically going to a generic sales income account. So anytime I was invoicing a client and we have different products, it wasn't going to the specified sales income account that I wanted in the chart of accounts. So now I have to go back into each invoice and bulk update all of those when I can't go into them individually to make sure that the income's going to the right sales income account.
Yeah, well, thank you, Macy, for stepping in. I mean, that's exactly what I was trying to say. I mean, I hope Macy would be now knowing like how to properly set those things up so that you don't have to do those manual ledgers every single time. But those are kind of small things that you should be taking care of, and I will be walking through all those different processes so that whoever is starting now do not need to go through the same mistakes that most people do. Now, I always think about like five parts when you want to try Zoho Books. The first and foremost thing is to define what are the modules that you want to be using. By module, what I mean to say is there might be some of you who just deal with like direct invoices. So you don't have any kind of process that involves creating something like a sales order because you do not deal with manufacturing something. Now, at the same time, some of you may not even have any process of doing any quotes. A quotation is not even something on your dictionary. So you just send out an invoice directly and you collect payments from them. So, but then there are those certain type of businesses who employ every single thing that Zoho Books has to offer. You do quotation, you do work order management, and then you also do invoicing. So the first and foremost key thing before you start using Zoho Books is try to understand like which of those modules that you would find it applicable for your business. Now, let's say in furniture, because it's more related to manufacturing something, I feel that doing a quotation is applicable for my business and for Zilka Furniture's business. And then there's going to be the work order, which is anytime when one of the client accepts the quotation, then essentially it becomes a confirmed order. Some of you call it as work order. We call it as sales order in Zoho Books. And then maybe I don't need something like sales receipts. So sales receipts is a very simple way of how POS systems handle the point of sale systems. You don't need to have a separate invoice and then a separate payment. It's just everything just as a single receipt. So that's what sales receipt is. But then in my situation, maybe because I don't need it, I could just simply leave it as empty. Then maybe a time where I do not even need like time tracking. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that it's much more simpler to look at Zoho Books when you just have the modules that you would be using on a daily basis. So step number one is to define which modules would you be working with. Now, for those who have been using the books, can you maybe tell me which of those modules that you find it useful and which of those have you been using so far? And if there were any specific modules that you have like disabled, so you don't normally use it. This might be a question that's maybe geared towards those who have already been using the books for quite some time. Do anybody want to chime in?
This is Amy. We don't have any, because we are just a service industry, we use the invoice, the recurring invoice. I have used the credit note a couple of times, but basically for us, that's all we use.
Thank you, Amy. And Amy would might be finding it like more difficult if at all. She might be seeing like sales orders, quotes, and everything on the books instead. All that she needs is just like invoices, recurring invoices, and that's all she needs to see inside the book. Makes life a lot more easier. So before you get starting to use the books, just figure out like what is the process that you follow in your business that you like to see getting implemented on Zoho books, and then turn on or turn off the modules based on your needs. So step number one is completed. So after you're done selecting which modules that you want to use, the next step is kind of like optional, but I would say it's beneficial to do this step, which is to integrate your bank accounts or your credit card accounts. And the reason why we have this integration, and by the way, this is an integration that directly integrates with your bank system, so that those statements that become available on your bank account will automatically be fetched and be displayed inside Zoho. Now, this is a very important part when you try to look at it from the accounting standpoint, because this is a place where you do a process called as reconciliation. Let's say you send out an invoice to a customer today in Zoho Books for about like $100. Now, the customer makes the payment on your bank account, and so you get a credit of $100 on your bank statement. Now, the process of how you match the $100 credit on your bank statement is equal to the invoice having $100 in Zoho Books is what we call it as reconciliation. Now, do remember that like you can integrate more than one bank accounts, more than one credit cards all at the same time. And this would give you a kind of like an indicator on what kind of performance is happening in your business in terms of money, what's the bank balance that you have in total, and what's the amount of cash that you may have as liquid cash on your hand. Now, have you been like integrating your bank account so far? I mean, like, was it helpful for those who have tried integrating a bank accounts?
We do integrate our books with banking, and it's awesome. I love that when I send out an invoice and it gets paid, it shows up right in the banking section. And like you said, at the end of the month, when the reconciliation comes from the bank, I can reconcile it. But we do use the banking with the Zoho books.
Thank you, Amy, for that input. And
I will also like to add, we have been doing it with Stripe. I think it has been working very smoothly. The inflow of the payment has been very smooth with Zoho Books and Stripe to our bank accounts. So yeah.
it's amazing. Yeah, and Stripe is, by the way, another payment gateway that you could integrate with Zoho Books so that it allows you to collect payments from your customers directly when you send out an invoice from inside Zoho Books. And not to mention, was I'm pretty sure you already know it, but for the information for others, when you integrate Stripe, you also get a separate account getting created. So whatever fees that you pay for Stripe is also going to be getting recorded automatically. So essentially, you don't have to do those manual steps of how much amount of money are you paying Stripe as a fees for all the transactions that you're doing. So there are like a couple of benefits that you also get when you integrate something that natively integrates with Zoho Books. Right. So this is kind of the very fresh account that I have. So you may not see any good numbers here, but I'm sure once you have your bank accounts integrated, these charts would make a lot more, I mean, it would become a lot more meaningful. Now, remember that like most of the banks are available for synchronization. It's when you click on this add bank or credit card, it displays like essentially a list of all these different bank accounts. Essentially, when you click on connect now, it takes you through one of these bank feed service provider. The reason for this happening is because Zoho Books do not directly access any of your banking information. We depend on these kind of third-party providers that does all these financial information processing. So you log in through the Yardley, for example, and then Yardley is going to connect with your bank account, and it's going to feed those information into Zoho Books, which Zoho Books will obtain and process it as individual statement entries and become displayed inside your banking module. So let's say that you are now done with the banking module. The next step is going to be to set up chart of accounts. Now, this is the part where I feel most of you may not be paying attention to, but I feel it's very, very important that you do it at the very early stage. And the chart of accounts is going to be the replica of how you manage different accounts manually. Let's say you have like different books for each and every one of the ledger type. So that's basically what chart of account is. Now in Zoho Books, we provide the ability to even create a custom account. So maybe let's say I want to create an account specifically to categorize one of the product type. So what I can do is I can choose that type to be one of the income, and then I would specify that this is sale of furniture, just the furniture alone, and I can hit save. So this way, like I can build all the different types of accounts that I want to see on my Zoho Books, so that once you're done with it, the next step is obviously to create like different items that you are essentially selling, or different services that you are providing from your business. Now, when you're creating a new item, this is a place where you specify what is the account that the value should automatically be going to. Now, essentially, by default, it would all be in the sales account. But let's say I want to create a new account and want to associate it with. So I just created a sale of furniture as a separate income account. And I can choose the account right here and state that this is a default rate of like 1,000. And let's maybe call it as installation of the furniture. And what I will do is I can just hit save, so that in the future, anytime I create a transaction with this item selected as installation of the furniture, the whatever value that I'm going to be selling it for will automatically go into the sale of furniture's account as an entry. So at the end of the month, or even at the end of the financial year, you want to see which accounts are having like what specific values, so that you can then do the processing of, what's the tax that you have to pay, or like just for the sake of finding out what the net running revenue for your business. You can easily get a detailed information based on individual accounts. So that's why I said it is much better to define those chart of accounts at the very initial step. And that being said, like, let me ask you, for those who have been using Zoho Books, have you ever paid attention to this account? And if so, how did you get to know about it? Because this is one area where I've seen many customers just stating that they have never paid attention to it. And so every sale that they did just goes into a general account called as sales. But having it as a breakdown into these kind of different accounts selected here will give you much more in-depth insights about which account is having what values. If anyone wants to give an idea about like how you defined those kind of accounts and use it with the items, please feel free to share your experience. Right. Well, I guess not, but I hope that for those who were not aware of it, now that you know how to set an account properly for each and every item that you sell on Zoho Books. One other thing is about, especially for those who are trying to move from a third party system. For example, let's say you want to move from QuickBooks, or let's say you just have not been using any accounting system at all, but you have values on your manual ledger, the manual books that contains data from what's the number of years that you have been doing business. So before you start using Zoho Books, in order to ensure that you get the correct numbers by the end of financial year, it is very vital that you set up something called as opening balances. Now, the opening balances essentially is a way where you tell the Zoho Books that on this specific date of migration, I had these so-and-so different accounts in my Zoho book, and these are the values that I held at that point of time. So essentially, even if you import some invoices, the historical invoices into Zoho Books, those numbers would not be affecting the opening balances, provided you specify the correct migration date. To put it very simply, let's say I am specifying this to be 20th of August. And I will now specify that as of 20th of August, the total amount that I have in the category of furniture and equipment is going to be a credit of $1,000. Now, what I can do is I can import invoices that I have been generating for the last 2 years, 2023 and 2022. But then those invoice values are not going to be affecting these numbers that I'm specifying here because of the migration date being a future date to those invoices. So essentially, it's a way where you can even import those historical transactions into Zoho books, but not affecting those balance sheets that you may be bringing over from another system into Zoho books as on this specific date. But any invoice that are created after this date will continue to add those numbers or subtract those numbers from these different accounts that you will be having right here. So that's how opening balances, defining opening balances is something very important. Now, I know that most of you have mentioned about using Zoho books or intend to use Zoho books, right now, but tell me about your experience about migrating your data from your previous accounting system. If any of you have been successful in migrating the data from your previous system, how has it happened, and did you happen to face any issues, or do you want to share any experience with others so that they get to have a better idea about what to expect when they want to migrate? By the way, please feel free to unmute and you can share your experience. And maybe even if it's some kind of like general pointers that you want to give to those who are at the verge of migrating over to Zoho books, maybe your tips might be like very beneficial to them.
For the clients that I have been migrating over to Zoho Books, I imported all of the activity. In prior years, for the most part, I imported the activity with journal entries. Initially, when my journal entries were small, like only about 25, 30 lines, they imported just fine. Then I reached the point where there was a journal entry that was like 300 plus lines, where the system was rejecting the journal entries. So I discovered that whereas in the original journal entries, I did not have to put an amount in the debit and credit column. When the journal entry, was 300 plus lines, I had to enter a 0 in the debit line or credit line, or my journal entry kept coming up with an error saying that it did not balance when it actually did. So that was one of the issues I ran into that I ended up correcting with all of the other entry lines, is that I kept coming up with that error saying it didn't balance when the actual amounts in those columns did balance, but I had to enter zeros. So that was an issue I came across that may be helpful to someone.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Andrea. And I'm pretty sure like if you're trying to import those journal entries for yourself, then I already have a solution that Andrea just has given you. Amazing. So moving on with this idea of like how we start using Zoho books. Now, there are essentially two processes that I always talk about, which is how you manage the sales side of your business and then how you manage the purchases side of your business. Now, in terms of sales, we have a couple of major modules that majority of users use, which is you start with a quotation. There's kind of the basic diagram that I made to help you get a quick picture of how the flow of data is going to be. You start with a quotation that you send out to your client. You give your client the ability to accept or reject it by themselves, because gone are those days when you won't expect an email from your client saying that I accept this code or I reject this code. And every single time you always have to make a note of that email and go into the specific code and then manually mark it as like accepted. But with Zoho Books, what you can do is you send out a quotation to one of your clients, and then they get the ability to view those quote online, and then they can accept or reject that quote at that time. If by any chance are they rejecting it, they also would be having the ability to make a comment about why they are rejecting it. Maybe they're asking for some extra discounts to be put in. Now, at the end of the day, like, you get to have those communication without having to involve the emails itself in the first place. So you keep it like very neat and tidy, all within Zoho Books. Now, it is at this time that some of the clients prefer to use sales orders, specifically if they are manufacturing industries. But if not, you can jump right away from the quotes all the way to the invoices. But if not, you go from quote and then you convert that quote into a sales order, again also known as work order. And then you convert that sales order into an invoice when you essentially ship that order to your client. Now, it is against that invoice that if you would be integrating the payment solutions that Zoho Books integrate with, then your client can make those payments online. Just like how you send out a link to them, they click on the link and then they type their credit card information, and then the money would be deposited into your account, and Zoho Books would just record that the invoice has been paid successfully. So that's a flow on the first part. But then there are those certain scenarios of yours where you may be interested to collect something like an advance payment. Or maybe let's say you are offering a service for like $1,000 as a quotation. And then you mention a clause that states that if you accept the code and if you want us to be providing you the service that we offer, then you essentially have to book it with us by paying like 10% of the amount. So those kind of advance payments is what we capture as retainer invoices. And the flow is like you create a code, and on acceptance of a code, you get a retainer invoice created that gets paid by the client. So essentially, when the code eventually gets converted into an invoice, then the value that has been captured on the retainer invoice will be applied so that only the balance amount would be paid by your customers. And obviously, it'll be getting recorded on the customer payments. Now, there's also this concept of recurring invoices. Because some of you might be into the service industries and you might be interested to automatically have an invoice created every single month or every single quarter or every single year. So that's when you can convert a specific invoice into a recurring invoice so that by the end of each and every billing cycle, an automated invoice gets created. And if you have the customer's card registered on your end in Zoho Books, then you can even charge their card automatically for the value of the invoice. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to take you all through this very basic process on how you create a quotation and how does the experience of having a customer accept that quotation would look like. So I'm going to take you back into this Zoho Books. And I have a customer with the name Amelia here, and they have the email address mentioned. Now, let's say I want to create a quotation for this customer. So what I do is I go click on this plus button on this quotes module inside Zoho Books, choose which customer am I going to be creating this for, and then I will specify what item am I going to be selling there. Now, what I can do is I can click on maybe the teak wood table as maybe like some 10 quantities. And then I would also be interested to create this installation of the furnitures right here. Now, at any point of time, let's say you want to modify the rate, these values are completely free text values. So you can make modifications on the go without even having to go back into the item and then update it. So that whatever value that you're updating here is going to be specific to the code that you're looking at. Now, one quick tip that you want to remember is if you remember that we were speaking about which account does the value of this item go to when it's successfully being paid by the client. You can also set those accounts right on this page of creating the invoice. All you have to do is like click on the three dotted option on the right hand side, and I click on show additional information. So you would find the ability to see what tags are there. So tags is a way where you can easily segment, identify what category of item is that going to be. But it is on the invoices that when you create, you will also be able to specify which account should it fall under if it is getting successfully paid by your client, which I'll show you very shortly. Now let's say that it's just these two different items totaling to 2,300. What I can do is I can go scroll down a little bit, and then I can hit save and send if I want to have this sent to the customer automatically. I'm going to hit save and send, and you get a nice PDF generated here and then gets attached automatically to this email. Now there is a place in Zoho Books where you can customize those so that the look and feel of those estimates can be matching to what your business is used to send out to your clients. And once I hit send, what happens is the email address of this client will be receiving this quote, which looks something like this, so that they can accept or reject that quotation right at that time. But some of you who would be starting with Zoho Books may not be finding that option to let the customers accept or reject it. So the place that you have to essentially take a look at is going to be by going to the settings of your Zoho Books. And when you go to the quotes, you will find this checkbox that says allow customers to accept or decline estimates via the public link. So that's what you'll have to ensure, that the checkbox is checked so that you give your clients the ability to accept online. Now what we can do is, once we have this checkbox checked and hit save, and I go back inside to my the mail address, then what happens is I receive a quote something like this, and the client would just be clicking on view quote, which would take them to the portal of Zoho Books, and so they can find this option right here that says accept or decline. Now if I'm going to decline, for example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to state that the declining reason is that try resending it, for example, resending the quote with a value different for installation. And I'm going to hit decline. So immediately what happens is, on the quote, I'm going to try refreshing it. We will now see that the quote has now been changed to the status of decline. And if you want to see like what's the reason of this decline happen, you can go and click on this comments and history, where the comment that has been mentioned when they're declining would be present right here. So let's say this is the case, and I would be sending an email stating that, like, unfortunately, I cannot reduce the price. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try sending it one more time. So I'm going to send mail one more time and then state that we cannot reduce the price. This might be a very bad sales strategy, but forgive me, because I'm not from the sales. I'm going to try to make this realistic and say that reduce the price. We can look at the other opportunities. And I'm going to hit send. Now, when the email comes back, they would be finding the view quote one more time with the email content that I would be specifying. And so at this point of time, let's say the same link is being used. And what happens is they would again be finding the quote on the portal, again with the option to accept or decline. Now, let's say that they want to accept this estimate right at this point of time. So what happens is the status would be marked as accepted. And so from inside the books, the status would now be changed from sent to accepted. Now, this could be the situation where you might be interested to convert this quotation into a sales order if you deal with work orders. But if not, let's say you just want to create an invoice at this point of time and send it to the client for getting some payments. Then what you do is you click on convert to an invoice right at this point. So you can now define, like, if you give like any kind of discount, how you would be interested to get these numbers specified on your invoice. And then I hit save and continue. Now I can notice that most of those information that you would be capturing on the estimate, for example, the item details or anything related to the customer information, will all be getting transferred automatically onto the new invoice. And then what I can do, I can hit save and send right at this point. Now the customer receives another email with the option to pay now, which essentially, if you would have integrated your payment gateways, then they would be able to make the payment online themselves. Now you might be wondering, like, what are those different payment gateways that Zoho Books integrate, and how do I receive those payments? Now, I'm going to take you through a list of all these different payment gateway providers that Zoho Books integrate with, and you let me know if this is something that you have been using for your business so far. You go into the settings of your Zoho Books, and when you scroll down, you will find an option called Other Applications, where you would find something called a Square POS in case if you're into this POS system. But if not, just search for something called as payment gateways. So essentially, when you click on payment gateways, this would describe all the list of payment gateways that Zoho Books integrate with. Stripe being one of the preferred gateway, but not limited to just Stripe. We have like Forte, we have Square, we have Authorize.net. But let me know in case if one of these payment gateways is something that you have been using, and how is your experience using it with your invoices in Zoho Books. Or do anyone want to chime in with?
I mentioned before we have been using Stripe, so I think it is one of the most reliable methods so far. Out of all the methods we have used, it's very smooth. Never been a delay, and all the payments which customers are making are instantly getting credited to our bank accounts. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Vasu. Anybody else have been using any other payment gateways and maybe have something to share?
Most of my clients are using Stripe, but I do have a few on Forte. And so and the primary reason that Forte is doing the ACH without all the technical setup that you have in Stripe. Stripe doesn't make it easy to set up for ACH.
Yeah, it's understandable. Thank you, Michelle. But it's no wonder that, like we mentioned, Stripe as one of the preferred gateway. But as Michelle was mentioning, ACH is one of the place where, specifically this part, the place where you do like ACH. If you do those Forte or ACH payment, you would also be able to make those outbound transactions. Now, let's say you get a bill from one of the vendor. I mean, the purchase is part of something that people look at, but just to get you an idea, let's say you have a bill that you have to pay out to somebody else, then having one of these ACH payments will allow you to make those payments directly from inside your Zoho books. So all that you have to do is like just go inside what we call it as a bill, and then you hit pay via check or pay via ACH payments. Then the money gets automatically transferred from your bank account to your vendor. But I mean, this is a place where I can find like every single one of the payment gateways that we support. And so feel free to take a look at it and see if any one of those work for you. Because there's one thing that you may have to look at is different payment gateways charge different transaction fees. Now, these transaction fees are not related to Zoho in any way. So these are transaction fees that you pay for each and every transaction that you make. But these go as fees to the respective payment gateway. All that we do from Zoho side is we try to make use of the technology to integrate with those platforms, so that the part where recording of invoices, recording the status of what's the status of the payment is all automated. Now, for those who do not use those online payment gateway, because again, there's always those group of set of customers who prefer to do some cash transactions. So what you can do at that point is you still have the ability to record payment offline. So all that it means is I can just simply say that I have received the payment of $2,300, and then I'll specify this account to be deposited to the petty cash, because if it's a cash-based transaction. But if it's to a bank but not happen through the payment gateway, then I choose like bank account and then specify the value of amount being received. So once I do like record payment, that essentially completes the cycle of sales in your Zoho books. So you start from quote, you have the customer accept the quote, you create an invoice and have the customer pay, or you just manually record that a payment has been received, so that every single receive that you do, the payment, they'll all be getting recorded under the payments received section. So that's how you work with the sales module in Zoho Books. Now, in addition to tracking all these different sales, there's also this part of expenses tracking, right? So let's assume that like it's with the case of the Zilka furniture, and so Zilka furniture struggle with like tracking the operational expenses, and they were trying to find a place where they can easily record expenses so that at the end of the month they see what are those different expenses that have incurred in a specific period of time. Or I could also put it in a way that I should also be able to create those entries that I can easily make a payment by my accounting team. So accounting team take care of all those payments that the furniture company has to take care of. So that's when the purchases module in Zoho Books comes into picture. So we have a very brief module in the expenses tracking part. So we have something called as expenses itself as a module, and then we have something called as purchase orders. So purchase order is something that you raise to one of your vendor that you need something, either materialistic, and so the vendor sends you a bill for that. That's when you create a bill against a purchase order, and then you make the payment to your vendor that gets recorded as payments made right here. Now, in order to see how it looks like in the Zoho books, it's very equivalent to the sales module itself. Now, how sales have like customers, and then you create a quote for a customer and you convert the quote into an invoice, the purchases module has vendors on it. Just like if you want to relate it to the sales module, you have customers replaced with vendors. Now, after vendors, you have the expenses that you really want to just manage any expense to be noted on your accounting system. That's when you create an expense against any of the vendor that you have. I can choose that like this is an expense that I have spent for advertising and marketing. So I can state that this comes to like $1,000 today, and that this has been paid through the bank account or maybe just the petty cash, for example. And I can hit save. So every time you create an expense, the expense entry will get automatically logged against the account that you have chosen. So if you have like different types of expense account, you would have a very clear picture of what's the expense that you're making on a monthly basis and what is the breakdown of those expenses that you do on a monthly basis. So you know that I spend so and so amount of money in advertising, so and so amount of money in salary as expenses as well. But let's say let's take the other scenario where I'm trying to buy something from one of the vendors. That's when we create a bill. So we create a bill by specifying like who the vendor is going to be. For example, let's say in this case, it's going to be the Line Enterprises. And so the bill number that they have mentioned on their order slip is going to be the says like bill hyphen 123 and state that the bill I have received was yesterday. So I put the bill date as 19th August, and the billing happened because I purchased a glass table from them. Now this is a place where you can choose like which account does it go under, but if not, just like leave it because this is taken up from the purchase account that we declared when we were creating the item at the very initial step. So once you hit like save and open, you always have a bill in the open status, which at this point of time, if you would have integrated one of those payment gateways that we were talking about a little earlier, then you can even print a check from your bank directly from inside Zoho Books, so that it becomes a valid check that you can pass it on to your vendors. But if not, like you can even do this ACH mode of payment so that the money gets sent to the vendor automatically from inside Zoho Books. So all these are built with the mindset that we wanted to give you a better experience of not having to switch between different systems all the time. All that you need to do is just use Zoho Books every single day for every single thing that you want to do as an operational standpoint. But on the other hand, let's say you again have a situation where you do not use either the check method or the ACH mode, you always can make a transaction right here that says like the payment made is going to be $40 and that I paid through cash, and then I hit save right here. So that you can now see that the bill is now changed into the status of paid status. So that's kind of a very brief idea of like how the purchases module work in comparison to how we were looking at the sales module a little earlier. Now, the expenses part, especially the purchases side, is not going to be just about tracking expenses. You'll have to remember that, like, some of you might be procuring materials, the raw materials for building your materials out, right? Or maybe you just want to manufacture something, and so you want to get those, the modules that you want to use, and then you sell it out to them. So those are also situations where you'd be creating purchase orders and then use those stock number that you have and then create it as sales order to then send out an invoice to your client. So that's how the sales and purchase module work with each other when you run a business completely from end to end. So lastly, we'll also be looking at what I was talking about as reports. Now, Zoho Books is not just about making things about creating an invoice or creating a bill or making the payments easier. It's also about getting you know what's happening in your business in terms of exact numbers. So that's why we have a lot of different pre-built reports that are available when you click on this reports module on the left-hand side. Starting from like the profit and loss, for example, each and every one of these reports will give you an idea based on the accounts that you have declared on the chart of accounts and based on the transaction value that goes inside each and every one of those different accounts that you already have declared. So I can easily see that I have an income of like $2,300 because I sold like two separate quantities of item, but then I incurred an expense of $40 because I purchased something through one of the bills, so that I get a gross profit right here. Now, if you remember about those opening balances that we were talking about, then those numbers will also be getting displayed under the respective financial year for this profit and loss report. So again, it's very important that you do all those opening balance numbers very accurately so that you don't even need to have a separate entity just proofreading any of those, the accounting numbers, because you have everything displayed right inside a specific report right here. I always get to have certain requests where customers would like to have a customized report, a very custom report that's not really helpful with any of these pre-built reports. Now, those are the times when we recommend an application called as Zoho Analytics. So Zoho Analytics is a business intelligence tool. It can relate it to like Google Analytics, for example, where you can integrate different applications together. For example, like you might be a CRM user, Zoho CRM, where you keep track of all your customers' information and every single deal that gets you the revenue for each and every deal that you close. Now we can use Zoho Analytics to pull information from CRM and at the same time pull information from Zoho Books as well. Now with all those data in one single place, you can build reports that might contain data not just from Zoho Books, it might also contain information from CRM, from Zoho Books, and why not even like if you use Zoho projects, you would still have those information all in a single place. But I always would recommend you, the first and foremost step is to just go through all these different reports, because these are reports that we understood from the requirements from most of the customers' needs, and we have made them as standardized reports. And you can click like any of the reports that you have in Zoho Books, see what is happening, use some very basic filters to drill down the data that you see on your screen when you try to view a report. Now, that being said, I wanted to know what kind of reports have you been interested to see, or if you felt that the reports in Zoho Books have been helping you so far. So any kind of inputs that you want to give later to the reports, I'd be really glad to know what you're looking at.
There was one particular report we were looking for. Normally, when we have all the customer payments, we want to have a report which also shows us payments for each salesperson.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if we can have a report where all the customer payments can reflect basis the salesperson, and then we can have a breakup of who has got us the maximum payment from the customers.
I see. I understand. And is that a report that you already have figured out yourself, or are you still in the quest of finding out how to make it work?
We have the report, but we had a struggle taking it out basis the salesperson, which can show us the consolidated performance for each salesperson.
Yeah, because like there is one of the report that is available inside Zoho Books, and maybe something that you may already have seen, which when you go inside the report, so when you search by salesperson, you have a specific report built for these kind of scenarios, just like sales by salesperson, which gives like who is going to be the salesperson and what is their net sales based on the invoice number. Was this helpful, or was there something that was not working out with the specific report?
Maybe I need to look at this particular one. Thanks for letting me know. I'll start working on this one and see if this fulfills our requirement. Otherwise, maybe at the end of the session, I'll ask you specific questions if it is not completed.
Absolutely. As I said, like just for even for others, just go through all these different reports that we have available here. More often than not, I mean, what you're looking for is going to be already available here on this report list. So just feel free to take a look at it, and you can always like email us also in case if you feel that some of the reports are not available and you want it, and so we can help you out with the analytics part where I can create those custom built reports just for you. So that being said, like we covered about like how do you start using Zoho, what are those modules that you need to be aware of, and then we also were looking at what are those different modules available inside Zoho. But there is one thing that I always take some time to explain to every single one of my customers is what level of customization is possible. Because anytime you create a quote or an invoice per se, there's always this column that says like quantity and rate. And then the amount is always going to be a multiplication of quantity and rate. Now, there are situations where you might be interested to introduce another column here, part of the calculation. And I'll give you an example of one of those companies who are dealing with um, selling different gold bars and silver bars. And what they were doing is they wanted to have another column here that stated what is the grams of gold and what's the equivalent of ounces of that gold. And so they do not want to just have like quantity because this could be representing maybe like 2 bars of gold. And so the total ounces might be different. And so the rate must be a calculation of quantity times the ounces times the rate. That should be the amount. But in Zoho Books, we normally don't have that ability to introduce a formula right on the section. But we were able to accomplish it by customizing this a little bit. So what we did was we brought in a new column right on this item table. And then we also have introduced a field outside the item table that tells us like what's the actual commission that we have gotten for a specific invoice. But those were taken care of with the help of automations inside Zoho Books. Now, what you have to do in that situation is first to customize this invoices module. So what you do is like you go inside the settings, and you see you have like all these different modules listed separately. And the one thing that you have to know is, let's say I want to have a field that calculates the commission on the invoice. So what I do is I go inside the invoices and I click on field customization. Now this applies the same thing even for other modules as well into these in the Zoho Books. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new custom field and call this as commission, just the commission, maybe commission dollar, maybe. And then I'm going to put the data type as currency right here. And I will now be specifying, maybe obviously I do not want to show this field on the PDF. So I'm going to just like leave it as no. And then I am going to hit save. Let's maybe change a commission amount. And then I'm going to hit save. Now, because I added this field on the invoice level, the next time when I'm going to try to create a new invoice, it would be getting displayed as a separate field on the invoices itself, just like this. But what in case if I want to bring in a column inside the item table? So that's the time when you want to create a new custom field, not on the invoices, but on the level of items. So always remember that if you want to have a field displayed on the invoice level, then you create it directly on the invoice. So the same thing goes for quotes or even the sales orders or even purchase orders. But if you want to have a column separately available inside the item table, that's when you create a new field inside the items selected as a module. So maybe this could be the size of the or maybe we'll just call it as size, and then I'll name this as a decimal field. And I am going to specify that this should be available when I am creating new transactions, and I'm going to hit yes. So now that I've specified a new field called a size, the next time when I'm going to try creating a new invoice, and because I've declared it as an item type, I will now be having a new field available right here. Now you have to remember that like just typing something here is not going to affect the calculation in any way, but then that can be taken care of using what we call it as automation inside Zoho Books, which I'll come in a little bit. Now, when you have a field that has a value into a custom field here, and the next time when you want to save this invoice per se, this column will also become available on your invoice. But sometimes you may also notice that the field just disappears for whatever reason, and people become like very puzzled on why it's not showing up, even though you have marked that field to be showing up on the invoice or on the PDF. The most common reason is that sometimes if all the rows of the item details does not have any value for that specific column, then the column will automatically become hidden. So if in this case, if you see, as soon as I removed the value of the size, then it immediately vanished from the PDF. So this could be one of the very probable reason on why you may not be finding certain columns being displayed on the PDF when you have a custom field created on the items module. Now, in relation to that, like let's talk about that automation that I was talking about. So inside Zoho Books, again, when you go into the settings, you have a separate section called as automation. Now, automations can be used to just send out an email, or it could just be to invoke something we call it as a custom function, which is basically a script that you can develop so that you get to build some customized action. Just like how we were talking about, where I want to multiply the size times the rate or times the quantity, and then update some other value on the specific invoice. Maybe let's say we want to calculate the commission. Anytime I create a new invoice, I want to go through the purchase rate of that specific item and what the selling price of that item is, compare those two things, and then produce the quantity of the commission value. And then you put it onto that commission field automatically so that you can then build out custom reports that say what's the total commission that your company has incurred across every single one of those invoices. So building out a workflow is like very simple. You just create a workflow rule, specify which module is it going to be for. Now, in our scenario of having a commission being automatically calculated, you use the invoices module, and you name that workflow as calculate commission. So the next step, you define like when should this workflow be getting triggered, because there are situations where you might be interested to have certain notifications, such as like reminders to be going out to your sales team. Let's say you want to send out an email notification to be sent out maybe like 2 weeks from when the estimate is created. So, and if it's still on the state of estimate, you want a notification to be sent out, then you choose like date-based automation. But for our scenario, which is just when an invoice is being created or edited, I want to calculate the commission, I'll go for the event-based where I click created or edited. And then I choose like any field is getting updated on the invoice. I want to trigger for every single invoice without any criteria. So I'm just going to skip that part of defining criteria and specify one of these actions that I would be having at that time. So it could just be like sending out an email, or it could be invoking that custom function, which involves a script that calculates the commission and update the field automatically. Now, there are so many different things that are possible that you may be wondering if it was not possible by default. Well, I mean, not everything is possible by default in a Zoho Books or any application, but we have the ability to customize it based on how you want it to be working. So that's when we introduce custom functions. So at any point of time, you're looking to see if something is feasible in the first place, if something is possible in the first place using custom functions. Just hit our Zoho community, make a post stating like wanted to know if an automation that you have as an idea on your mind is even possible in the first place. And so we will be able to get back to you stating, hey, this is possible, and maybe this part may not be possible, but then we can definitely try to see what you're looking for and help you out with all your needs. But I wanted to know, like, if you have been having any kind of workflow set up in your Zoho books, and if you have been using particularly the custom functions that I was talking about, and if so, like, what kind of scenarios were you trying out using those custom functions? Do anybody want to give some idea about what kind of automations have you set up? Have you been setting up any kind of automation in Zoho books in the first place?
We haven't set up any yet, but I'm very interested in this as I have 3 partners that when an invoice goes out, each the partner gets 30% of that sales. So what I'm interested in is being able to set up something so that it automatically tells me from that sale what their commission is, and then do a report at the end of the month so that I know how much to pay them. Because right now I'm doing that all manually. So if there's a way to set this up so that I know what the commission is off each invoice, and at the end of the month, it'll give me a total so I know how to pay each partner, that would be amazing.
Yeah, and that's most definitely possible. I mean, as I said, like, we'll just use a function along with the workflow that says, especially when the invoice is marked as paid, that's when the automation kicks in. And it's going to take the total of the invoice, and you define like all those percentages. Maybe just like hard code, it's stating that user 1 always gets like 30%, user 2 gets like 20%, and user 3 gets like 10% of the profit, not the total invoice, maybe just of the profit, and you want to split that into 3 different people and keep a database of all those commissions. By the end of the month, as you say, you can make that payout pretty easily, and that's completely doable. And so I have my colleague mention that email address on the chat, mentioning support.usa@zohobooks.com. So just feel free to like list out what you're looking for on that email address, and we will definitely be able to help you out. Yes, Vasu.
So the report you mentioned to me about salesperson, I've just reviewed it. This report is pretty good because it shows us, we have a team of close to 15 people who are working on these invoices, and they are the salesperson. So I can see the count of invoices for each one of them, how much invoices they have raised. That's kind of a sales they have done.
Yep.
But what is missing here is that against that particular invoiced amount which they have, how much have they collected? So is it possible if I can get the collections also in this particular report so that I'll be able to see collected against invoiced?
I see what you're saying. So as I said, like, this may not be able to give you the exact collected state, because that essentially involves what's the actual payment received against those invoices, right? So
Yes.
that's essentially where we can make use of these Zoho analytics. We can have a column that says what's the total invoice value against each and every salesperson, and then a second column that says what's the actual amount received against those sales, which I believe is what exactly you're looking for. So that's something we can definitely take it up in Zoho Analytics, which you can directly integrate with Zoho Books and build those custom reports out.
So, like, do we need to have a separate call with you guys for this?
Yes, I mean, just mention that what you're looking for is to have both the invoices and the payments received against each and every salesperson in a single report, and just mention it as on the email that my colleague has mentioned on the chat of this meeting, and we'll help you build.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
So I had a question about kind of the automation between the going from quotes to kind of invoicing, because in the insurance industry, you kind of get multiple payouts. You kind of have a commission in the beginning, and then you would have 3 or 4 as kind of the as earned kind of pay. So you have a sale, you get paid in the beginning, and then you get paid at month 9, 10, and 11. And so kind of having that automated as to that 75% paid out at month 1, and then that remainder being paid out at month 9, 10, and 11. Is there a way to kind of automate that so that I can see that forecasting without having to go in and do that that manual work?
Well, I would say that like if the process is going to be a streamlined process, which is it's always going to be at the month of 8, 9, or 10 that you want to have the value sent out as an invoice, then we could automate it. But if you're going to say that it may be for like customer one, I think, and I'm saying that this is going to be month 8. And then for another customer, when you're creating an invoice, you're going to say that maybe at like 2 years from now, I'm going to send out the reminder invoice. Then when it's more dynamic, it's very difficult to automate it. But if we have a fixed set of process, we can definitely see what we can do to work it out and have it like automated. Because at the end of the day, like automation itself, as the name suggests, it's to automate those repetitive tasks, which is when you have a streamlined process that you do on a like repeated basis is what we can automate.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, like whatever ideas that you have that you're thinking of, like, automating, or if at all it is possible to automate, just make a brief note of like what it is that you're looking to automate and send us out a brief idea of what you're looking for, and we will evaluate and get back to you with what is feasible. And if something is not, we will let you know that it's not because of so and so reason. But I really do hope that like the session was like helpful for every one of you to understand like how the Zoho Books is supposed to be started using with, and that hopefully you have gotten to know a little bit more on the feature side, and hopefully I've poked around a little bit of your ideas so that you can try to bring them to life and make the automations maybe helping you down the line. But I do want to take a few more minutes just to speak about the Zoho community. So Zoho community is a place where we try to bring in users from across the globe together into a single platform, and that's when like you can access it through like community.zoho.com, where you would find like very great discussions happening on various ideas. And it's also this place like where we try to understand like what our customers' needs are by understanding what are the features that they are looking for in the first place. So we try to understand what you're looking for and try to prioritize based on the number of requests of similar type is being arise. So you can access community by going to community.zoho.com and just try to check it out, see like what people are doing. And this is also a place where we do post information about what is being updated on each and every one of the application on a regular basis. Now, there's apart from community, we also have something called as Zoho forums. Now, this is more specific towards individual application. Now, let's say you just wanted to know about like Zoho Books, want to read more about like what Zoho Books has to offer, then the forums are going to be the place where you can find application-centric discussions happening across the globe. Now, lastly, there's also the Zoho user group chat room, and I'm pretty sure like you've all been added to it already. But this is a Click channel. A Click is a platform that we use to communicate with our clients. And so we have a separate chat room just for the finance user group, where we see users discussing a lot about like how to tackle one specific scenario. And so this is also a place where you find users coming up with very innovative ideas that they have figured out on their own when they were trying to solve a problem, which would be very helpful for others as well. But just in case if you have not been part of the Zoho user group's chat room and if you want to be added, just let us know, and maybe Srinidhi or Sushmita here will be able to get you added to it. So lastly, I mean, like, feel free to tag us on social media to, if you want to give us a shout out on what did you learn from this meetup today, and maybe just some information about what you might be interested to hear in the future as well, because we try to tailor these kind of meetups based on what you are giving us, what you're trying to know more about the applications that we have for you, so that we try to bring in like personalized content to you and try to get more of you to understand like what Zoho's capabilities are in the very first place. So my name is Arun again, and I really wanted to thank you for all the time that you had spent today learning more about Zoho Books, and I hope it was very productive for each and every one of you as well. So thank you very much. And I'm going to be here for a few more minutes. So if any of you have like any other questions that you want to maybe ask, or if you want to let the others here who are participating in this meetup know more about an application or Zoho in general, please feel free to use this time to network among each other. Thank you.
I have a question about the invoices. We do ACH and Stripe. Is there a way to take off the credit card link that is automatically on there and simply have an ACH link or a portal link? We are having issues with people clicking the credit card link and then they say, well, just charge my credit card. And I have no way of doing that. But if they put it in the portal, I do. So is there a way to remove that credit card link?
I'm afraid like we cannot like specifically remove certain types of payment options, but let's say you have like Stripe and also an ACH and you want to enforce a specific type of payment gateway alone to be associated to one specific invoice, then during the process of creating an invoice, you will be given an option that says what are the payment gateways that you want to associate with an invoice. So you can probably like take out Stripe, for example, and just have one payment gateway available for one specific invoice. So it may not be the ideal way, but at least it's a way where you can restrict from showing like multiple options to your clients. I hope it helps, Amy. So maybe if any.
Is there a main? Yeah, I just had one more question. Is there a main difference or a better way? Is it better to set up a recurring invoice or set up a single invoice and then click the button at the bottom to make it recurring? Is one better than the other?
No, I mean, it completely boils down to your preference on how you want to create it. But the scenario is kind of the same, right? You create a recurring invoice and you mention it to charge like immediately, then that means an invoice gets automatically created. But then there are situations where you initially create an invoice without having an idea that it's going to be a recurring invoice. Then at a later point of time, you get to know that it has to be a recurring invoice, right? So that's the time you convert an invoice into a recurring invoice. There's no one way or the other. I mean, like one being better than the other way. It's more of coming down to preference and the situation that you're trying to solve.
Okay, thank you.
So I have one more question. So we are using Zoho Books as well as Zoho CRM. Can we initiate invoices from CRM as well, which can automatically integrate with Books? Because right now we do it through Books, but we would like to do it from CRM as well.
See, well, Martha, that's a very interesting question, and thank you for bringing that up. One of the integrations that Zoho Books has is with Zoho CRM as a product. Now, in Zoho CRM, when you log in, there's going to be like these different modules available. It says like you have like quotes, invoices, and sales orders. But in Zoho Books, you have the way to integrate your Books account with your CRM, which is again by going to the settings. And it's under integrations. You go to Zoho Apps, and then you find Zoho CRM right here to connect. Now, when you're trying to connect to Zoho Books, after you integrate all these three modules, the contacts, the vendors, and items, you will find an option here that says enable transaction modules in Zoho CRM. So remember that that's a button that will become available only after you synchronize all these three different modules here listed here. But once you have enabled the transaction modules in CRM, the next time when you go inside Zoho CRM and you search for something called as Zoho Finance, it will be listed as a separate module. And let's say you go inside one of the contact record, for example. This is one of the contact record that you have, and you want to raise an invoice in Zoho Books for this customer, but inside the CRM UI. Then you will find from this list of items in this related list, you will have something called as Zoho Finance. That's when you click on that Zoho Finance and then raise an invoice from there. so that you are essentially raising an invoice on Zoho Books, but from inside the CRM's UI. I'll have my team like maybe put the link to that integration to study a little bit more about this integration. But what you have asked is completely possible with the integration that we have between these two applications.
Right, that sounds great. But in case if we do it from CRM, like, is there any difference, or is it as same as doing it from books?
Well, it's like CRM has its own way of handling those records. I mean, you have those invoices module, but to put it in a very point blank way, the invoices that you create inside the native inventory module of CRM do not transfer over to the invoices module of Zoho Books. So it's very important that like if you're using Zoho Books and you integrate it with CRM, you always click that Zoho Finance related list and then create an invoice from there so that it will be created inside the Zoho Books.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If I want specific help on exactly how to set up an invoice, as I asked you about the commissions, because I don't want to take time here, is there some way that I can have a one-on-one with someone to help me set up that so that the reports come out at the end of the month?
Absolutely, Amy. Just like email us with maybe when you're available to maybe get on a call, and our support team will be able to understand in better on like what exactly is about the commission that you're trying to set up, and we can help you out with building that out.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Well, I mean, it really was like very nice talking to each and every one of you. And as I said, like I hope you found this very interesting and useful in joining these things.